Growing up is a difficult thing. Harder then is it to perfectly capture that feeling, that emotion of finally getting over the hump of teenhood into adulthood. Many media projects have tried and subsequently failed to just get it right. Thankfully, I cannot say the same thing about Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, as it so eloquently borders the line between wacky comedy, heartfelt romance, and coming-of-age story, all the while capturing the unique feeling one feels when they finally grow up. In today's video, my aim is to completely break down this show, from its animation to its voice acting to, of course, the story and heart of the anime itself. But first, for some quick background, I'm not a fan of the original comic. While I've seen the 2010 live-action film adaptation, I don't really remember much of it. I haven't read an ounce of the source material. So really, I'm going in blind here, yet I don't think that impedes on the experience one bit. And yet, despite it being great for newcomers, it also seems to be fantastic for already established fans of the franchise. More on that later, though. Here is how this video will be broken down. I'll first start with the non-spoiler stuff like animation and voice acting, all the production quality stuff, and then we'll include a story section that goes over the base story, but really only fully spoils episode 1 and the actual premise of the show. I don't believe this series is dependent on a unique premise anyway. It relies almost entirely on its execution of said premise. With that being said then, let us begin. Before I fully dive into the wacky world of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, I first want to have a discussion with you. Yes, you specifically. So come here, take a seat, grab some tea, here it is, take the cup, and have a chat with me. Animation is a medium almost as old as television itself. Furthermore, I've been drawing things long before I started capturing them in live action. All the way back to our caveman days. To revolutionize animation then is no small feat, but I honestly think Netflix is doing it. The idea that animation is fundamentally for children and young teens is slowly dying, as anime becomes more and more mainstream. Anime is primarily focused for teenage boys, but there is an ever-growing subset that continues to be made specifically for adults. These are called seinen. While many seinen series have seen great success in both anime and manga form, look at Goodnight Poon Poon for example, even shonen anime has become increasingly more adult. From the horror-based thrillers of Jujutsu Kaisen and Chainsaw Man, to the political dramas of Attack on Titan. Honestly, the most popular stuff right now, even in the shonen sphere, is adult skewing. This is a major change in anime. Since anime is becoming more and more the focal point of animation as a whole, this means an entire shift in the medium is happening. But for a true change, we need frontrunners. Just as Stephen Curry finalized an already developing change to three-pointers in the NBA, we need animated series at the forefront of this shift. I've already discussed Arcane and Cyberpunk Edgerunners as being both the future of animation. Series made for adults featuring not just violence and gratuity, but also bombastic, stylized, and just different animation. These series are allowed to be so good because they have actual funding behind them, and they're able to get away with more adult things due to them being online shows. For a better explanation, here is a 1-minute short I made a while back explaining all of this. The 1980s OVA boom for Japanese anime was probably the medium's golden era, and we're here to tell you that we have another one coming. Streaming services, especially Netflix, have made the kind of stories told in those OVAs, often gore-filled and hypersexualized, not only financially viable, but probably the preferred choice for the consumer. People love blood. The Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, these are shows that feature gruesome hyperviolence, and everyone just eats that shit up. This is, of course, a way to tap into our primal desire for such bloodshed, just the Colosseum was for the Romans. For anime, Devilman Crybaby and Cyberpunk Edgerunners are not only Anime of the Year contenders, but they're also being watched and loved outside of just anime fans. Netflix and other platforms have the unique ability to give exposure to such anime, while also having the funds and economical structure to make sure they have the time to properly make them into bangers. This, combined with Netflix failing with live action adaptations but finding success with their animation outings, makes me believe they'll finally start to take animation more seriously and be at the forefront of an animation boom. With shows already out like Edgerunners and even non-anime like Arcane, the world of animation has never looked more unrestricted. Creators finally seem to be free. I may be jumping the gun when I say this then, but I think Scott Pilgrim Takes Off has joined these esteemed ranks as the faces of this new animation boom. Now, on to the show itself. This is going to be a short section, but I've never read the comic book, as I said before, but I can't imagine a comic book coming more to life than this anime. Seriously, what they've managed to do here is simply astounding. The fights are a saga-filled sludge fest, and the dialogue seems just as pretty to look at, if not more so. And those character designs, chef's kiss, as they are the clear standout here, especially regarding Ramona Flowers. For more gushing about the beautiful animation of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, I would recommend Mother's Basement's fantastic video on the anime, linked of course in the description. The fact that they were able to get all the old cast from the live-action movie to voice-acted in anime, some of which have become Hollywood superstars, is nothing short of a miracle. This is what Disney often does with Ghibli films, so for Netflix to have the same pull is pretty special. But was this a good decision? Look, there's something to say about having live-action actors voice act in animated films and shows simply because of star power, while a lot of fantastic voice actors are waiting for their big break. Honestly, voice actors aren't nearly appreciated enough in the US, and we lack the infrastructure that Japan does when it comes to voice acting. I don't normally say something good about anime infrastructure, so I don't say this lightly. We should appreciate our voice actors much more than we do. With that being said, however, I think they made the right decision here. For starters, this is a unique case, as they already made a well-beloved cult classic film, so bringing back those same actors is a genius marketing move, promising loads of nostalgia waves to wash over us. But even more than that, the performances here are simply fantastic. It reminds me of SSS's Dynazenon, as it has a sort of chill vibe to it. Most anime is over the top, and while I can appreciate that for what it is most of the time, it certainly wouldn't fit here. And it's just nice to watch an animated series that doesn't involve yelling every 5 seconds. It just seems grown up, made for adults, and pleasant to the ear. It creates a necessary chill vibe, especially with characters like Wallace Wells and Ramona Flowers, the two standouts in my opinion. That being said, all the performances fit their role perfectly, and I honestly couldn't be happier with the voice acting for a Scott Pilgrim anime here. Now is the time for some very light spoilers. If you're not about that, back out now. The first episode follows the plot of the film's beginning with Scott dating Knives, a high schooler. Well, they're dating, but they're not really dating, a fact which the anime plays down a lot compared to live-action film. In fact, most of the cringe factor is virtually gone from the anime. Upon rewatching the first 20 or so minutes of the movie as I'm writing this, I was shocked to see just how uncomfortably funny it was. To get back on track though, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off follows the life of wild Scott Pilgrim as he lives his precious little life in Toronto, Canada, a beautiful city I might add. Go Raptors. He's in a band, he thinks they suck, and then he meets the girl of his dreams in, well, his dreams. But of course, she actually exists. After officially meeting Ramona Flowers at a party, he asks her about Sonic the Hedgehog, always a surefire pickup line. She works for Netflix because of course she does, delivering movies. Very meta, I know, and a real throwback. And he orders one just to see her. After asking her on a totally not date, they hang outside in a blizzard. He can't see her, but he can feel her presence. After going through a random mysterious door, they go back to her place and things get a little steamy. He invites her to go to his big concert where Knives will also be. Awkward. But things go from bad to disastrous as one of Ramona's 7 evil exes, Matthew Patel, busts onto the scene and attacks Scott. And just as it seems the latter has the victory, like in the comics and film, he gets KO'd, turning into a pile of coins. This is where things get interesting, as virtually nobody except for Knives really cares about Scott's death, and even she gets distracted by Envy Adams showing up to the funeral. This shows how others view Scott, and assumably reflects to the audience what kind of person he is, which is not that likable. But wait, Ramona hears him in her dreams, just as he had done with her. Could it be that he is actually not dead, but rather is just missing? The rest of the story proper then follows Ramona on her adventures to find Scott. as she goes about talking to her evil exes. This fleshes out each character more, but one that is sadly kind of neglected is the titular character, Scott Pilgrim himself. This is where we get a bit spoiler heavy, so if you haven't watched the anime, you may hop off at this train stop now. Scott gets some character development with older Scott, a time-traveling Scott. He comes to different conclusions as his older self, but the exact ways he reaches those conclusions isn't exactly, well, fleshed out. I love that the series focuses on Ramona Flowers. We've already seen Scott's story twice with the original comics / source material, the film, and the beat-em-up video game. Yes, that exists. But this new Scott is, well, new. This isn't the same Scott, yet we get little in the way of viewable character development for him to show his growth. We're left to wonder how this new Scott and Ramona Flowers will get along. But the older Scott does serve as a reflection point for new Scott, and a sort of unintentional guide of how not to act. So I'm sure it'll work out fine, especially with all of Ramona's character development. But this is one of the only real gripes I have with this new anime adaptation. One quick thing I want to add to the story section. The development of their relationship, Scott and Ramona, seems a bit shallow. I think it's the importance of the concept of sparks. It's that concept of love at first sight, and they just have sparks. And that's why the show kind of explores that concept. So, yeah, back to regular scheduled programming. On the outside, Ramona Flowers is the perfect archetype for the manic pixie dream girl. Something that I think Scott Pilgrim Takes Off specifically recognizes, as she literally starts almost every episode dyeing her hair a different, quirky, and vibrant color. But in reality, she is really anything but that. But let's slow down and explain what I believe a manic pixie dream girl is. To most people, this is a quirky fictional girl, specifically made to be different from those other girls, that has shallow writing, meant to save a troubled teen or man. Simple enough. But I think it goes a bit deeper than that, and that its history extends far beyond just the early to mid 2000s. Dante's Divine Comedy, yes, I'm talking about it, is a seminal piece of narrative fiction that needs no introduction. However, anything past Inferno probably needs some explaining. Dante ascends through purgatory, then through heaven. While Virgil is Dante's guide in the Inferno, Beatrice eventually becomes his guide in Paradiso, the last section of the poem. Now, many poets have written love poems, and in them there is almost a fictionalization of women as being an other, putting them on such a pedestal that they're on the level of an angel, sent down from heaven to save the poet. In Dante's case, however, he literally did fictionalize a real-life girl and literally had her be an angel who would guide him towards divinity in his own story. Beatrice Portinari was thought to be an Italian noble from Florence that Dante met when she was 9. Now, I don't know how old Dante was at the time, but let's just say it was a very unhealthy love obsession at best. We're going to leave that there for the sake of YouTube. After her tragic early death on June 8th, 1290, Dante wrote La Vita Nuova, a prose work singularly focused on her, in 1293. Eventually, years later, he would finally write his most famous work, The Divine Comedy, and would fully immortalize the name Beatrice through his poetry. But this brings up a valid point. What about the girl herself? Well, we don't really know that much about her outside of what Dante has expressed in his poems. He fully holds the narrative of the life of a real woman in his hands, and has immortalized her as, well, a piece of fiction. One that was meant to save his suffering, wandering soul. If that isn't the first real example of the manic pixie dream girl, then I don't really know what could be. I don't think she had dyed hair, but just the dream girl as a surface level fictional character. I think we were focusing too much on the, well, surface level qualities of the dream girl. It's not about the dyed hair or the rebellious attitude, but rather it's an other, something different from the norm. And since the norm has failed to save you, then perhaps this other can. It's the idealization of women, putting them on a pedestal to the point where we see them as angels. just as Dante so long ago portrayed Beatrice as. Hell, Beatrice is the name of a character in my feature-length film American Dream, and you know I find this concept very fascinating. But how does Scott Pilgrim Takes Off handle this? Well, a core concept of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl seems to be, at least in my humble opinion, the lack of a backstory. They can be anything you want, be molded into any shape you desire. They exist solely for the redemption of the male protagonist. And this is where Scott Pilgrim Takes Off flips the whole thing on its head. Scott Pilgrim, the titular character, isn't the protagonist in this adaptation. Ramona Flowers is. Scott is hardly even in the story, which, while I do think is a flaw in the narrative, but it's a minor one. It's not really about fleshing out the romance, but rather it's about fleshing out Ramona Flowers. The romantic elements are brilliantly summed up to sparks, which I think is kinda genius, since sometimes it's how love starts. The story of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is a direct opposition of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl concept, as the entire point of it is to tell us, the audience, about her complex and complicated past. The comic does this too, I think, as does the film, although I'm not sure to what degree they do it in terms of the comics. But in those versions, Ramona is someone, or should I say something, to be fought over. While she can still be fleshed out, that fact still remains. In this anime adaptation, however, that's not really the case. Since Scott is seemingly defeated in the first battle, it's Ramona that has to go around and talk to her evil exes. Talk, not fight. Well, there is one fight, okay, but it's not over the girl, it's over feelings and emotions. This is a clear subversion of the core premise of even the original story, at least to my knowledge, and goes a long way as portraying Mona Flowers not as a dream girl, but as a person, with feelings, with emotions, and, well, with baggage. This extends into another one of the characters, Knives. She shows a ton of growth here, clearly moving out of her obsession with Scott Pilgrim, not only by pursuing a career and virtually getting over his apparent death, but also by going to Ramona in the final battle when she's injured, not Scott. As I've made it clear, I've not read the original comic, but I have to imagine, at least from the information I do have, that the comic also breaks the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope by actually having Scott explore Ramona's backstory. But the point still stands that the story is from his perspective. Just as Dante told the tale of Beatrice, Scott is telling the story of Ramona Flowers. He is exploring her backstory, which leads us gracefully into our next section. The male gaze in art is a fairly simple concept. It's the woman being the subject of a male artist, usually something to be desired or sought after. The parallels and subversion of this in Scott Pilgrim Takes Off are rather obvious, especially as we discussed in the last section. However, the difficulty arises in what the male gaze does to women internally. It becomes almost a second personality, one that observes and silently judges the behavior of any said woman. We take so much from art. We are influenced by it. When you constantly have men portraying the lives of women, those women in the audience, especially from a young formative age, are going to accept that this is how womanhood should be, internalizing that, and thus the male gaze is born. Scott Pilgrim Takes Off subverts the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Honestly, even the original comic seems to do so as well, but the anime especially does this by directly telling us Ramona's story. However, I wouldn't necessarily say it subverts the male gaze, as it is ultimately written and even directed by men, namely Bryan O'Malley, the original Scott Pilgrim creator, Ben David Grabinski, and was directed by Abel Gongoro. At the end of the day, it can only go so far as to subvert the male gaze when it is written by men. But men can certainly be pro-feminist in their art, so it's a sticky situation. I still have to give them props for making such a Ramona Flowers-focused story and anime, while also recognizing the importance of women writers while writing women. But hey, I'm just a guy explaining to you what the male gaze is. Why take my word for it? the series never beats you over the head with its premise or core concepts, and above all, it's just fun. It's full of fun jokes that land, and is extremely self-referential like the entire time, sometimes even explicitly breaking the fourth wall, and featuring lines like the one Lucas Lee gives about not wanting to voice act in an animated series, or having young Neil's film be titled Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life, the title of the comic itself. It's just some fun stuff. I know a lot of people were going in expecting this to be a straight adaptation of the original comic, but it's really more of a sequel. And that has upset a good amount of people, especially fans who have read the original comics and wanted to see them animated straight out. I have read the comics, so I had virtually no expectations going in. I can, however, compare it to the movie, and I think the various changes make it better. This is most evident with the 7 evil exes, whom get way more screen time. They're actually fleshed out characters unlike in the movie, and I think the story is much better for it. I especially like Lucas Lee, and Chris Evans' portrayal of him will probably always get a good laugh out of me. I think too many YouTubers are focusing on this expectations versus reality debate. At least that's what their video titles tell me. And I hope to bring some actual discourse around the actual show that we got. Welcome back to the end card section / portion of this video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed your stay here on the channel. I'm still working on my 5-hour analysis and defense on the ending of Attack on Titan. I'm hoping to release it by the end of December, but we shall see. And now, a word from our sponsors, my horror short film, Squid Boy. Here is the trailer. And, as always, thank you for watching.